Good evening, Rowan. It's the 24th of February 2016 and it's just after midnight, and I'm making you a video that I promised yesterday, and I just can't wait to share with you some globalist outpourings that you made in a lecture entitled New Perspectives on Faith and Development that you gave in 2010. It was uploaded onto YouTube in 2010 anyway, and this event was sponsored by a number of organisations. It's on the RSA YouTube channel, which RSA is the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, according to their website. I thought they were an exam board. They were when I was at school. Anyway, I think that's the same organisation. But anyway, they were at least one of the sponsors for this event, another one being the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. Now, I want to just say something about the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, which is a matter of great humour and fury in Britain. Tony Blair's interfaith involvement, shall we say, after he got us into an illegal war and murdered 1 million Muslims, and then was appointed Middle Eastern peace envoy or something like that. He must be just about the most unpopular Prime Minister in the history of the universe. I'm not kidding. I've never come across anybody who's got a good word to say about him. But he did appoint you Archbishop of Canterbury. I do have something to say about that as well, you see. It's the Prime Minister of Britain who appoints the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it's very unusual for an Archbishop of Canterbury to be appointed from outside the Church of England, and you are in fact the first Archbishop of Canterbury to be appointed from outside of England since, what's his name now, Henry Michel, who was appointed on the 12th of March 1414. So that was the last Archbishop of Canterbury who was appointed from outside of England. He was appointed from Wales, actually. And something that makes this even more unusual, I mean, that was before the Reformation as well, so national borders weren't so significant in those days. They didn't have different provinces of the Catholic Church. So he was appointed from Wales in 1414. That was before the Reformation. But then, even after the Reformation, the Church in Wales, as it is now, was part of the Church of England until 1920, and there was still no Archbishop of Canterbury appointed from outside of England. And if you believe all the propaganda about you, this is because you're such a complete and utter genius and a very holy man and very close to God, and you're going to save the day and all that kind of thing. But obviously the real reason is that you're a globalist puppet, and you had to go to Wales to be appointed a bishop in the church in Wales, so that bishops in the Church of England wouldn't realise how terrible you were. Which would have impeded your appointment as Archbishop of Canterbury. And also, because you never had any training for ordination and had never been a parish priest, it made you pretty well unappointable as a bishop in England anyway. Quite apart from the fact that you're completely useless, accidentally on purpose, and only a political operator. So there you were, being appointed Archbishop of Canterbury by Tony Blair, who was selected as British Prime Minister at the Bilderberg Group in 1993. And the Tony Blair Faith Foundation was sponsoring this event at which you gave this lecture, New Perspectives on Faith and Development, which I'm just about to make a couple of comments about. But before I do that, I'm going to read from an article that was in The Guardian in 2009 about the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, where it quotes Professor Michel Schooyans of the Catholic University of Louvain, a specialist in anthropology and political philosophy, who accused Blair and his wife of supporting a messianic US plan for world domination. So this is a direct quotation now from Professor Michel Schooyans of the Catholic University of Louvain. One of the aims of the Tony Blair Faith Foundation will be that of remaking the major religions, just as his colleague Barack Obama will remake global society. With this purpose, the foundation in question will try to expand the new rights, using the world religions for this end and adapting these for their new duties. The religions will have to be reduced to the same common denominator, which means stripping them of their identity. This project threatens to set us back to an age in which political power was ascribed the mission of promoting a religious confession or of changing it. In the case of the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, this is also a matter of promoting one and only one religious confession, which is a universal global political power. Which a universal global political power would impose on the entire world. So that's Professor Michel Schooyans saying that, not me. Even though I agree with it totally. And environmentalism is the new religion. And the reason that the globalists are promoting environmentalism, apart from as an excuse for a massive land grab, they're promoting environmentalism because environmentalism subjugates human beings to nature. Whereas if we look at Christianity and Judaism, for example, these religions teach that human beings are made in the image of God and that we have a privileged place in creation. So this is a reason why they want to erode these beliefs, the belief that human beings have a privileged place within creation, and also that we're free to marry and to have as many children as we want. This is why the globalists want environmentalism as the world religion, to subjugate human beings to nature, and they promote collectivism as well, for the same reason that individuals can be sacrificed for the proposed collective good and for the good of the environment. And the reality of this is that it's just a conspiracy by the global elite to take control of the entire earth, to possess all of the land and the resources of it, and to only occupy a few other people as their minions, really, to take the land away from other people. They want to be in control of everything, and this is why they promote communism and environmentalism, and by means of propaganda they convince people that it's in their interests to go along with these things, that communism is in the interests of the poor, when the fact is that the poor suffer more from communism than any other class of society, and that environmentalism is for the good of the poor as well, which clearly isn't true, because if we look at the example of developing nations, they prevent developing nations from developing by using fossil fuels, and they also make energy very expensive for poorer people in the West as well. So neither of these ideologies are promoted in the interests of poor or vulnerable people or of the developing world. That's just the propaganda around it that useful idiots like you are employed to promote. So, just one final thing to say about the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. It has strong links with the Council on Foreign Relations, which, as I've said in a previous video, isn't a branch of the US government, although many people think that it is. It's an organisation independent of the US government, which was founded with the stated intention of world domination, and you only have to look on their website to see that they've got their tentacles everywhere. And I did mean tentacles. Anyway, now I'm just going to move on to comment on a couple of things that you say in this lecture, and I'm starting about 15 minutes into the lecture because it's my favourite part of the lecture, this, so I thought I'd start on a high note. So here's what you say. A philosophy that stresses only the need to secure abstract entitlements for all simply fails to address the complexity of societies in which so-called equal freedoms amount to protecting the liberty of the already secure and wealthy. Well, you're the already secure and wealthy, aren't you? With all your money and all your houses, and you pontificate into everybody else what they ought to think and what they ought to do and how they ought to stop emitting carbon dioxide and not have too many possessions and redistribute the wealth to the poor. Well, as I've said before, you first. You start redistributing your wealth, and then you can preach about it. So you go on to say, just as in the discourse of a lot of modern market economics, unconstrained freedom for some means powerlessness for many. So I just want to comment about this because you have given a lot of talks about financial institutions running riot and causing the economic collapse of 2008. So I thought I'd just let you know what actually did cause the economic collapse of 2008. Which was the US government. The US government interfering in the financial world caused the housing bubble and then the financial collapse of 2008. Because previously, lenders who were lending people money for mortgages would do credit checks on people and look at their income and all that kind of thing. And if the person was a bad risk, then they wouldn't lend them the money. But the US government decided that this wasn't fair, so they passed a lot of laws and forced financial institutions to lend money that they knew the people wouldn't be able to afford to repay. So that's a subprime mortgage. That's the jargon. So it was the housing market in America collapsing because of these subprime mortgages that the American government had forced financial institutions to provide for people that they knew would not be able to afford to repay it. And this also has led to a lot of houses being built when there wasn't really the market for them. So there's a lot of empty houses in America now, which is very bad for the environment because obviously you have to extract the materials and manufacture them and so on. And this has also happened in China as well. Big cities being built as a result of government planning that have got nobody living in them. So this is what happens when the government starts planning things. Rather than leave it to individuals and businesses to supply for the demand that's available. So the US government thought that they were levelling out inequality. This is what they said anyway, but they probably intended to crash the housing market because that way. They print all this fiat currency which doesn't mean anything, it's not worth anything, and then when people can't pay back this worthless money, then real assets are seized, like land and property and goods and that kind of thing. So the banksters get real assets in return for the worthless currency that they supplied in the first place. So it will all have been engineered, there's no doubt about it. But the point is that the subprime mortgage market wouldn't have collapsed without the US government demanding that financial services lent money to people they knew would never be able to afford to repay it. So you don't need to be constraining financial institutions and forcing them to lend money to people. It was government regulation that caused the financial collapse and not lack of it. So the solution to too much government interference is not more government interference. So I'll leave that there, and I'll come on to talk about the next point in your lecture.
A philosophy that stresses only the need to secure abstract entitlements for all simply fails to address the actual complexity of societies in which so-called equal freedoms amount to protecting the liberty of the already secure and wealthy. Just as in the discourse of a lot of modern market economics, unconstrained freedom for some means powerlessness for many.
So you go on to say, and this is the part of your lecture when you really come bursting out of the closet in a big way. So you go on to say, any talk about non-voluntary redistribution of wealth, whether by progressive taxation or adjustments in the conventions of international trade that can protect emerging economies for a period, will threaten a purely abstract account of rights and freedoms. Well, who is talking about non-voluntary redistribution of wealth? You're talking about it. And non-voluntary redistribution of wealth in a political system is called communism, and under common law it's called theft. You can't just go and redistribute someone else's wealth to you without being had up for theft, really. And you talk here about a progressive taxation, which is in the Communist Manifesto. People think taxes are inevitable these days, but there haven't always been taxes. So that progressive taxation is in the Communist Manifesto, and a lot of people complain about capitalism causing a lot of problems in the world and poverty and so on, and I think I've said this before actually. They're actually talking about corporatocracy and not capitalism, and also it's fairly unreasonable to claim that capitalism has failed when the system that we've got is essentially communist and not capitalist. It's just been redefined. Communism has been redefined as capitalism in the West. So, and communism, it's promoted to help the poor, but it's intended to help the global elite. Karl Marx, who essentially came up with the idea, supposedly anyway, was a Freemason. Karl Marx isn't his real name, it's a pseudonym, and he was recruited by a secret society to come up with this political system, and that's in the German introduction to Das Kapital. So communism, the Communist Manifesto, and Marxist politics and philosophy were never intended to help the poor. They were intended to take property and goods away from other people and locate them in the hands of the elite. And they thought this was going to happen with the First World War, but it's kept failing over and over again, because communism and Marxism are completely unworkable systems, because government planning is generally a disaster. And also, you get a high level of corruption among people who are given so much power over other people. So this is why it's important that people have the right to self-determine, really, and make decisions for themselves and their own property, rather than have these decisions placed in the hands of the government or any other body of people. So, protect emerging economies for a period. So these taxations and agreements could protect emerging economies for a period, but this will threaten an abstract account of rights and freedoms. I don't know why rights and freedoms would be considered to be abstract, really. I mean, we've had common law. It's a thing that most societies, if not all societies, accept to a degree, that you can't go around murdering other people and that you respect other people's property and so on. So that's common law, and other ordinary aspects of human life like marriage and so on are recognised in common law. So it's not purely abstract. You're making out that it's abstract so that it could be changed later on. You could say, oh, property rights and the right to get married and the right to have children, these are purely abstract rights and freedoms, and we need to rethink this, really, whereas the truth of the matter is that we don't. And also, you are supposed to be talking about religion and representing religion here as a Christian, which is a joke, but anyway, let's go with it for now. But Christianity is a revealed religion, as is Islam, which you refer to quite a lot when you're pretending you're friends with Muslims and you're not providing propaganda for 9/11 and so on. And so the rights and freedoms that individuals have as Christians or Muslims or Jews, I can't speak of a lot of other religions because I don't know about them all, but things like owning property and the right to marry and the right to have as many children as you want, well, these things aren't abstract in these religions. These rights are revealed in the religions, and I don't know how you can describe them as abstract. I mean, in every society on earth, apart from in China, which is another communist disaster, everybody has the right to marry and have as many children as they want. That isn't an abstract account of right and freedom, but you're trying to imply that the things that people take for granted are completely abstract, which is just ridiculous. It's only a way of undermining culture and common law and traditional religions in order to bring in the globalist agenda, which I'll come on to a bit more in a minute. The basic liberties of some can be secured only by the restriction of certain liberties in others. Oh, well, that's true, actually. We need to restrict the liberty of you. We need to restrict the liberty of you and people like you so that we don't end up with the whole world enslaved and people being hounded around from city to city for decades just because you didn't manage to get your leg over. So you go on to say that this is the point that basic liberties of some can be secured only by the restriction of certain liberties in others. The point is made with characteristic energy by George Monbiot in his groundbreaking overview of these issues in... Now you're going to give the title of a book here, it's just such a fantastic title of a book, and here you come, bursting out of the closet at last. So you're recommending this book by George Monbiot, who is a freelance journalist and writes for The Guardian. And the title of the book is The Age of Consent, a Manifesto for a New World Order. Let me read the subtitle again. A Manifesto for a New World Order. And then you particularly recommend his 6th chapter, which is entitled Levelling, and you call it an eloquent defence of genuine free trade as the organ of growth, and a scarifying critique of the naked protectionism practised by wealthy nations. Well, the naked protectionism isn't practised by wealthy nations. I mean, wealthy nations is just an abstract, really. It implies that everybody in the nation is wealthy, which obviously isn't true. So what we're talking about really are wealthy corporations who sometimes are based in wealthy nations, but are often based in places where they don't have to pay any tax. So, wealthy nation, I mean, we are, I suppose, relatively wealthy. I don't think anyone's starving in Britain, but you're implying that absolutely everybody in Britain and other wealthy nations is just rolling in endless amounts of money, living in luxury, and can afford to be giving it all away to people in other parts of the world. The poor people who wouldn't get it anyway, it would go to the powerful people who would give it to their friends and family. So anyway, I'm just going to talk about this chapter 6 of this book, The Age of Consent, a Manifesto for a New World Order, by George Monbiot. So he argues that there should be a redistribution of wealth, this is in his chapter 6 of this book, from what he defines as rich nations to the third world. Well, how do you redistribute wealth anyway? I mean, what's the point of giving money anyway? Do we send them money? What do we send them? You know, they've got land there that they can farm, and resources that they can use, and so on. So what is it that we would be sending them anyway? We can't send them the land that we've got here, and factories and that kind of thing. What is it that we would be sending them anyway? This is just complete nonsense. And the majority of people in rich nations aren't the owner of the nation's wealth anyway. They're not the owners of the nation's wealth. We may be relatively wealthy compared to people in many other parts of the world, but what on earth could we send them that would help? It's just complete nonsense. And also, the majority of the planet's wealth is owned by only a handful of people, like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and so on. The Rothschilds own over half the wealth of the entire world. They could feed, clothe and house every single person on the planet. So why don't you talk about them in your next Imperious lecture? Because you work for them, that's why you never talk about them. So anyway, I have looked into some of the other things that George Monbiot has written about, and he does criticise the established order to some degree, but he supports the things that are the greatest threat to the majority of people on Earth, one of which is environmentalism, and he's written another book about global warming called How to Stop the Planet from Burning, and he claims that Britain needs to reduce its carbon emissions by 90%. He's completely mad. And he calls people like me climate change deniers, which is ridiculous because nobody denies that the climate changes. Global warming skeptics or global warming realists. That's how we define ourselves. And he claims that the reason we don't agree with anthropogenic global warming is because we're ill-informed and received financial support from oil companies. Well, I wish I did, honestly. Oh yeah, you know the Church of England held most of its investments in ExxonMobil for the 10 years that you were Archbishop of Canterbury, and you never did a single thing about it. The majority of the Church of England's investments were in oil companies, and you care so much about global warming, you never did anything about that either. You're just such a hypocrite. Anyway, he also thinks that we should re-wild land, which that's exactly what UN Agenda 21 says as well. We should be rewilding places because human beings are a cancer on the earth and all this kind of thing. And he also makes the truly bizarre claim that sheep farming presents a great threat to the environment. And he thinks that 9/11 truth is a diversion from the real issue of global warming. And in this book that you've mentioned, Age of Consent, Manifesto for a New World Order, he argues for a democratic one world government. So, you're out of the closet at last, aren't you? Anyway, I've waffled on for quite some time now about that, and I've only dealt with 2 sentences, more or less, of what you've said in this 35 to 40 minute lecture. So I'll leave it there for now, but I've got plenty more to say about it, so don't worry. I won't be running out of things to say about you and all your globalist propaganda anytime soon. So have a nice week. Hasta la próxima.
Any talk about non-voluntary redistribution of wealth, whether by progressive taxation or adjustments in the conventions of international trade that can protect emerging economies for a period, will threaten a purely abstract account of rights and freedoms. The basic liberties of some can be secured only by the restriction of certain liberties in others. The point is made with characteristic energy by George Monbiot in his groundbreaking overview of these issues in The Age of Consent, a Manifesto for a New World Order, particularly his 6th chapter, which is entitled Levelling, an eloquent defense of genuine free trade as the organ of growth, and a scarifying critique of the naked protectionism practiced by wealthy nations.